Greetings, everyone. I am thrilled once again to be in conversation with my dear friend and brother, Keone Hanalei, who probably needs no introduction at this point, but let me briefly introduce you, Keone, and then I am so excited about what we're going to talk about today. In our last conversation, we were talking about the ancient lineage of Mu, known to many as Lemuria, and Keone's going to describe how we can understand those two. But we were talking about how Lemuria has disappeared because we're not able to access that frequency of love. So today we're going to be talking more. Keone's going to be sharing more about the disruptions that we get caught in that keep us from that connection and how we can find our way back. So I think this is so crucial in this time when this is such a critical threshold for coming out of our trauma and disconnection back into our hearts and higher consciousness. So thank you for being back in this conversation, Keone.
Mahalo. Thank you so much for this continued conversation and such an important conversation to be had and shared and proliferated. So it's such an honor. Thank you so much, Heather.
But just to share with people who may not yet know who you are, and they should, Keone is the founder of Pohala, Esoteric Hawaiian Botanical Medicine. And I can speak from personal experience. Your fern medicine, the products that you've made are so beautiful and energetically so powerful, Keone. And he is also an alchemist, a wisdom keeper and teacher, a descendant of the ancient Mu people. And so much of the wisdom that you bring to us is your commitment to that ancient lineage and how to bridge that, share that with us in this critical time on the planet. So thank you for doing that, your courage in holding that wisdom and sharing it with us.
Oh my goodness. It's like my kiakahi. It's like my life's purpose. That's something I enjoy so much. But I also, appreciate what you said about that courage aspect, because I feel like a lot of the listeners can relate that sometimes when we bring forth things that are not of the established narrative, it can be challenging and frightening, especially if for all of us, perhaps what we hold as so important is to belong. And many of us are following different narratives or agendas for the sake of belonging. And so when we introduce something that is not compatible to that established narrative, it can seem very daunting and challenging. And so, a lot of the wisdom that I bring forth of my own memory and the access I have of 1,017 generations of my own lineage, a lot of it is not so much compatible to the established narrative, but it has come by way of the encouragement I receive from people like you, Heather, and this audience who is so open with receiving and exchanging in these new ways and new paradigms to which we can begin to experience this phenomenal thing that we're all experiencing.
Well, and I think, Keone, and maybe this would be a great time just to mention your next upcoming program, because I think that part of what is so critical and why I know this community is so open to what you have to share is we know that we're in a crisis on the planet and that we've reached this level of decline in our consciousness and disconnection. The Kali Yuga period of forgetting and disconnecting from that wisdom we've once known. And as we heal and open to this ancient wisdom, we remember who we truly are and come back into that alignment with our true selves and soul selves. And then we can become the guardians and guides, bridging the way into this new world that we're moving into.
Yes, sister, so beautifully shared. And this is so aligned too with Aquarian energy, where I feel like, everyone gets to come into recognition that we are all leaders. And in this shared mutual leadership, we're exchanging once again. And we all have a very unique source code that we get to excavate and then exchange and share with one another. So it's a really beautiful time, but it does take incredible courage.
So mention your upcoming program and I will list it below the video, and then let's dive into our conversation.
Wonderful. Yes. So starting on July 28th, on Sunday, I am facilitating a 3-part webinar. And the title of the webinar is A Protocol of Legacy Cosmic Genealogy. And so I'm wanting to play in the fields of what it really means to host, to carry, and to experience a legacy. And we can all perhaps come into recognition that we are all experiencing a legacy. And legacies can be something super individual, like our personal kiakahi or our purpose. And is that something that can be transferable? I feel like that's part of the objective for all of us, is that that's how we make contributions, is our purpose, our gifts, are they transferable? But we begin with just examining and playing with what in Mu culture we call Marana. And Marana is the previous universe before this universe that was governed in the esteem of the octopus. And so the energetics of the octopus, which we believe to be the only species that survived, that transferred from that universe into this universe, the body and the behavior, my kupuna, my elders would say, it's the 2 Bs. The body and the behavior of the octopus tells us everything we need to know about what that universe is. And so if we can discern what the body and the behavior of the octopus tells us, we know the legacy of that universe. And then we come into a conversation the next Sunday about, wow, let's just perceive what this universe and this legacy could be all about. For some of us, there is a loud recognition that it's likely love. Likely. Right? Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about love as a legacy. And how can love be transferable? How can it be shared? Because if there is a universe, if there's this cosmic genealogy and there's another universe, we must properly transfer love. And this is like the sobering conversation. And Heather, you and I, before we jumped on this, we were exchanging about the conditions of the world right now. Are we in a proper space to transfer the energy of love? Maybe not. And so this is such an important conversation to be had. And then the third weekend and final weekend, we come into a conversation of what does it mean to complete a legacy? Or how do we even transfer a legacy? And this is an important topic because a lot of the disruptions about Mu and the fall of Mu, remember, the fall of Mu is not a war. The fall of Mu or Lemuria began with a sense of possession, attachment. And so if we are to transfer a legacy, we must be able to also detach from that and to not treat it or fathom it as an actual possession. And so I invite the audience to join me live for this upcoming webinar. And if you are listening to this after those dates of end of July, early August, I do share these ceremonies as evergreens. You can access replay access indefinitely. So I would so love not only for you to come and just listen to me, but also those of you who have come to my ceremonies, I love to engage. I love to engage with people because I am learning just as much from you. A lot of the data information that's streaming through me, sometimes I'm just showing up and hoping for the best. And it requires a lot of engagement and interaction so that we can support and inspire one another.
It's beautiful, Keone, and you're very, having witnessed some of your classes, you're very Aquarian in how you do that and invite everyone to share their experience and their truth. So it's beautiful.
Yes.
And all of this ties in with what we're talking about today, that legacy of love. How do we come back to that higher frequency of love in how we're embodying that. So talk some, well, first of all, it'd be really helpful to talk about what you were sharing with me before we got on the recording is how we understand that difference between mu and Lemuria.
Yes, yes. And this is, I feel like a topic that's only going to become louder. So sure, let's make certain clarifications or invite certain clarifications. So as I shared, I have access to 1017 generations, the doctrines and the archives of my family's legacy is within my iwi kua mo'o, my spinal cord. I come from a culture like many other cultures where we remember and learn how to read our spinal cord. And within our spinal cord, which many call the Akashic record, we can access information and data. And so when I access my iwi kua mo'o, when I refer to my oli helu or my genealogical chant, not once do I find Lemuria, the word Lemuria. But then I have conversations with such beautiful, lovely people of incredible high integrity, and they do remember it as Lemuria. And so I felt into, wow, where's the disconnect? How come I remember it as something and then others are bringing up another word, Lemuria? And, let me just start with how in academia, Lemuria was introduced. It was introduced by a zoologist, an English zoologist called Philip Sclater. And he brought that word up into our awareness because he was trying to rationalize how in Madagascar we find lemurs. That's right now on Earth, that's the only place we find lemurs is on Madagascar. But there's fossils of lemurs on the Indian subcontinent. And so Sclater was theorizing how lemurs could also exist in India. And so he theorized that there was a landmass that must have connected Madagascar and India. And he coined it Lemuria. That has been revised time over time again because of continental shifting, but it stayed in our subconscious, right? That word had to be introduced to us. Lemuria. The theosophist Helena Blavatsky, who is perhaps the most recognized voice when it comes to promoting and encouraging the revitalization of this energy of Lemuria, she only referred to it as Lemuria. I personally feel that Helena Blavatsky is someone of incredible integrity. And so when she channeled Lemuria, I'm like, okay, I'm going to listen, even though I know it as mute. Now, what I discovered is that Lemuria, coded in the word Lemuria, is actually corrections on how to reorient back into mu. And so for me, there is recognition that perhaps Lemuria is the word that must be shared amongst one another right now, because before we can even recognize the energetic of mu or the energy of love, we must first come into recognition of how to correct ourselves in order to even be compatible for that frequency of mu. And so within the word Lemuria is the corrections of how to reorient back into love. Shall I keep going, Heather?
Oh, this is extraordinary. Yes, keep going, Keone.
So this became, I became very confident in this when I allowed myself to converge into my own heart. I initially didn't understand why I was converging into my own heart. But something miraculous happened in that that's where I found the word Lemuria within me. Remember, mu is in my spine. It's in my Akashic record, mu. I found Lemuria in my heart. And so I said, wow, Lemuria has something to do with the function of the heart. Remember in the last universe, the function of that universe is found in the body and the behavior of the octopus. So there's a lot of functionality that we get to come into recognition of to know the secrets of the universe. So coming into the conversions of the heart, here's the really cool thing about the heart. So the heart is actually seven-sided. Lemuria is 7 symbols or 7 letters. The heart also has 4 chambers. Lemuria is 4 syllables. Lemuria. So there is a code of le, there's a code of mu, there's a code of re, and there's a code of ah. And all of these are 4 corrections that must be honored in order for all of us to come back into the frequency of mu, or the frequency of love. And those corrections are found not just in the word Lemuria. That word Lemuria is reorienting us actually back into the sophistication of the heart. One really cool thing, I'm going to keep saying one really cool thing, another cool thing, right?
This is all beautiful, Keone. Keep going.
Another cool thing about the heart, as a septagon, which is a 7-sided object. You spin any 7-sided object in water, and it creates a double helix. And so our heart, which is actually a hydraulic vortex, of course, it can behave as a pump. It's a muscle that's actually coiled. It's a muscle that's coiled. And you can take the heart, Heather, and we can flatten it out, and we'll notice that the muscle coils itself as a spiral. And so we can flatten out the heart. But when that heart is at 7-sided itself, that clenched muscle, as you spin it in water, it creates a double helix. Now, what are we? We're water. And so as the heart is behaving as its hydraulic vortex, it's creating the double helix in our very body. And so this heart-centered conversation, and this conversation about Lemuria on how we can restore love, comes by way of 4 corrections.
So energetically, the heart is embodying the path back to that energetic, that frequency of love. But the Lemuria word is the code to help us unlock that path back to the heart.
Yes.
Love. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is. Yes. And in one of our previous conversations, Heather, we talked about there are 3 traumas or distortions that lead to proper conditions for a cataclysm to occur. And I love that there are 4 corrections to restore us to love. Mm-hmm. And so if I may, I would love to just discuss with you, and this is musings, of course, as well, because I'm still receiving feedback from people, and I invite people to share what they're inherently remembering as well when it comes to deciphering these codes. We live in a symbolic world. That's the sophistication of the design of this consciousness is in symbols. You did a beautiful YouTube video, Heather, on the symbolism, and I believe you focused on Taurus. But the symbolism, and for us to come back into fluency of symbols, is so incredibly important. So we're no longer at the effect of the world, but we're actually contributing to the design of the world. And that comes in by way of the comprehension of symbols. And so let's look at these symbols of le, mu, re, ah, in the 4 chambers of the heart, the 4 syllables. Now, the first syllable is le, L-E, le. So I reference global data, and I went into as many points of reference to as many cultures as possible. And there's a theme that kept coming up when it came to L-E, le, and what that means for so many cultures in the world. And le represents an identifier. This is like maybe most common in French, right? Le.
Thinking that.
Yeah. It's an identifier, to identify. And so my translation of that first correction, to identify, to come into acknowledgement, to come into perception of something, that first correction is love the body. And I say love the body because in this animate world, the most obvious thing is the physical body. And even if we talk about home, what a home is, this is the ultimate home as far as this realm and this experience that we're all having right now. And so the very first correction, love the body. This could even be a very provocative conversation because there seems to be such a rejection of the physical body that many of us are not willing to even allow it to be recognized as a home. It's a point of convergence. And with a lot of the energetics that we are playing with, right, we get to translate what the energy of source, what the energy of God as engineers and architects, what it looks like, sounds like, tastes like, feels like, but it all must converge somewhere in order for that to be translated. And so the first correction, in order to restore us back into this energetic of love, is love the body. Now, when I feel into love, I'm feeling into accept it, celebrate it, enjoy it, resource it. When I feel into love the body, the conversation is not only do I believe in my body, but also how does my body actually function? It's the functionality. So all of that with love the body, we're all called to come back home to the body.
Keone, this is so profound because I also feel like that is some of where we started on the path of disconnection as we transitioned out of the age of Taurus into the age of Aries. We started to disconnect from the sacredness of the body. And when we disconnect from that love of embodiment and the sacredness of embodiment, then we also disconnect from a sense of the sacredness of all the life around us. And it starts us on this path of separation, individuation, disconnection that we're needing to heal and correct to come back to love. So this feels so primary, so critical as the first step in that correction process. And when you also talked about Le as the identifier, it also feels like there's an energy in it of be here now. Be fully present in your body in this moment.
Yes.
And really honor the sacredness of this body and this moment.
Oh, and I love that you said it like that, Heather, sacredness, because for me, that's really a great way to identify love, is to acknowledge the sacredness of something. And so can I acknowledge that this is sacred? And if many of us, make a practice of that, like right now, do I really acknowledge this as sacred? But then our behaviors speak otherwise. And so we're violating that first correction to restore us back into love. And therefore, we're going to continuously be informed by an energy that disrupts us from coming back into that energetic of Mu, of Lemuria. But it all begins with love the body, the sacredness of the body. And not to feel, because I feel like the contentions about this first correction, love the body, is some people may feel like they're imprisoned. Sure. As light beings, it can feel very like imprisonment to come into form. But remember, this is part of the experiment. This is not an error. And it's also fleeting. This will not exist forever. What is one of the laws of the organic? One of the laws of the organic to which we will all experience is decay. Decay. Even our planet will decay. And so as we are here now, let's resource it and function in a way to which it is properly resourced to channel that love.
And I think as you're saying, Keone, it is important to realize that there doesn't have to be that separation between the spirit and the body, that when we can celebrate, honor the sacredness of embodiment, so many people who've had near-death experiences or come back with memories of the other realms talk about how being embodied is such a vehicle for accelerated transformation, an incredible experience of the range of the creativity of the cosmos.
Yes.
So we can actually then enter into this experience of this dimensionality with joy and celebration and excitement. It's an adventure.
Yes, yes. And thus we become proper, engineers, architects, and artists, because we truly know how to access and how to celebrate the conduit that is channeling this energy. And we also get to feel it like this, it must be locatable. I get to be locatable in a world of form. I must be locatable in order for that energy to channel through me. And so the physical body is like a convergence for that vortex to come through and then select me to transfer certain energetics. But if we're consistently dodging the physical body or rejecting it, we're also not accessible to be proper conduits for that.
Yeah, well said. So what's the second code?
Yes. And I love that when you went into the cosmos there, Heather, we brought up one of the key points of mu, of that Le Mu. So mu, this is really fun. In my exploration of mu, MU, it is the oldest symbol to reference permeability. Permeability.
Interesting.
So that second correction is love contrast. Love the contrast. One thing about this amazing, phenomenal experience we're all having is that it's comprised of contrast. And you and I, in this world that we live in today, there's so much division because there's an intolerance for contrast. And many of us are only interested in feeding or attending to that which is most comfortable for my opinions, my ideas. If I feel unsafe, I reject contrast. And so permeability is our ability to move through, to engage, to exchange, to converse. And if we're not willing to do that, then we violate that second correction, which is to love the contrast. This doesn't mean that I have to assimilate myself to things that don't feel good, but this means that I get to be available to negotiate with it, to exchange with it. It's like diplomacy, and I was speaking into, I did this 3-part series about a feminine shift, right? And you know how I said, sometimes I just show up and see what happens. We'll see what happens. And for me, the result of what a feminine shift truly represents, of course, this is within myself, but also how it can be observed in the exterior conditions, is that a feminine shift is about energetic diplomacy. Energetic diplomacy. And so when we go to the second correction, love the contrast, we're re-inviting ourselves into true diplomacy.
This is fascinating, Keone. Would another way of describing that, and I love that notion of it being permeability. So would another way of describing that be acceptance of diversity?
Yes.
And the realization with our permeability that we are a part of this larger web of life, that we are interconnected with all that is. But I love how you describe that permeability doesn't mean the loss of your own uniqueness, that it is about that awareness that we each are a fractal expression of the creativity of the cosmos, but we're a part of this sacred web.
Yes.
Interconnectedness with all that is.
Yes, yes, and especially in patriarchy, being conditioned in patriarchy, and some of the things that I was told from patriarchy is contract,
Yeah.
contract. And so I'm not available for that permeability, not only because I'm not willing to also engage and to flow with other things with the web and to truly come into recognition of the grandness of potential, but I'm also not willing for things to engage with me unless
Yeah.
it fits the agenda of my level of comfort. And so we're all walking around rigid. And so the second correction of love, the contrast, open up, come in the body, first correction, come in the body, and then with incredible courage, open that body up. Allow it to be this filter system, filtering. And thus we become in greater recognition of this web to which you're sharing, which is the potential. And for me, potential can initially seem so frightening because of that contrast can be so frightening. But the grandeur that the potential presents itself, it's also so generous. It's generous, and it says, all things you may access, but you have to open up.
Mm. This is so powerful, Keone, because you're also talking about how it integrates that energy of the sacred feminine. It's about being in right relationship. So instead of contracting and isolating and being in that sense of separation and rejecting what's outside of us, we open, but open from that awareness of right relationship, right harmony, and our interconnectedness with all that is. This is powerful.
Yes, and it takes incredible trust. But you know why in my own life, this idea of trust did not work. And I was always attempting to force myself to trust others, to trust the universe. It never worked because I never trusted myself.
Mm.
That's why I wasn't an energetic manage. And so coming back to the first correction, love the body. Trust the body. Allow things to land within the body. Allow things to funnel, filter through the body. And thus, the exterior conditions becomes just as friendly because that's my energetic match. And I was sharing with you, Sister Heather, the life-changing thing in my whole life was when I no longer perceived this world to be so malicious. I began to receive and to experience the world as more friendly. When something for me is more friendly, I'm more apt to engage, to ask questions, and not just ask questions, but to receive responses, and to not be so threatened or so triggered when the responses were uncomfortable for me. But to know that in this field of diplomacy, it's all about negotiation. And I'm a negotiator. We're all negotiators, but we must deem ourselves worthy of that. And that comes from loving the body.
Yeah. Loving the body and loving the self, which then leads to right relationship with others. That's so key, because otherwise we're forcing that trust or interconnectedness from a disconnected place within ourselves.
Yes, Sister Heather. And when I brought up that function, right? It's one to believe, and that's really pivotal to come into belief. But then from belief, we also get to function as such. And one of the disruptions, we had another conversation, Heather, about one of the disruptions of the age of Pisces or Piscean energy is that it had this tendency in its juvenile aspect to go into subordination. It's turned into an age of worship, into this age of subordination where we were not properly functioning as who we say we are. We would just say it, maybe it would be an idealization, but we weren't actually functioning as such. And so when we love the body, we're also going to function as who we say we are. And it's so interesting too, because I have so many conversations, and this is really how that juvenile aspect of Pisces really grabbed hold of me. But also what I see in the external conditions is that we rely on our identity to be based merely on ideas or imaginations. This is who I idealize myself as. Okay, but then how does you function as that? It's like the phenomenon of repeating mantras. And repeating mantras can be really helpful because they create a pattern, which is so important to create a pattern. But first, you must believe in that mantra. Otherwise, you're just manipulating yourself. I'm manipulating myself to believe something. And then from that belief, we get to function as such. And so when we decode the corrections for Lemuria, for Mu, it's not just about idealizing it or imagining it. It's also about, can we function as that? And that's why loving the body is that number one.
Embody it.
Yes, sister, can we embody it?
Wow. Okay. Got the third one.
Well, Heather, this is going to be so anticlimactic for the audience, but you'll have to come to the ceremony. Yes, for re and awe. And I'm sure, Heather, you and I will have continual conversations, perhaps. But I am going to give a little cliffhanger. And, it may be purposeful, too, for there to be a little cliffhanger, because those first two are so colossal. The first correction of really coming into the body and coming into the sophistication of embodiment, it's so incredibly important right now. And I invite the audience to just experiment with that. Can you utter something that you hold and host as something that you truly believe you are, and then actually function as that? That in itself will be life-changing. And then that permeability, can you engage with the world as that? Or do you have to do that in private? Can you only embody yourself in private because you're going to be too threatening and disruptive to the narratives, the established narratives of the world? Can you come out to the world and function in that permeability to allow yourself to be locatable? And perhaps, my sister, a way that we can enhance this conversation is you and I can talk about the sophistication of how whales and dolphins complement this Lemurian energy, this Mu energy.
Let's talk about that, but can you give us at least, you're going to leave us hanging here, can you give us at least a hint as to what we're opening up to with these other two aspects of the code?
Yes. So with beyond that permeability, then we really come into this aspect of archiving, of proper archiving. And in this reality, we can even feel that as like the imprints that are made. The imprints that are made. So how do we transition into the archiving and the loving of the archiving? What I really love about the loving of potential archiving is this is where we take full responsibility for how we engage with the world. And this is like integrity, coming into the integrity. And I feel like that's possible once we feel safe, but safety comes with loving the body. Many people want to eject perhaps the body because they don't feel safe. That's rational. We need to hide. We need to be anywhere but here. I remember my kupuna would say, boy, you're in every single direction but now.
And so we have to be here now, love sacredness of the body, to then open to being permeable in right relationship with what those around us and the energies around us, to then move into integrity. And I would think the archiving also is about moving into wisdom.
Yes, sister. Yes. Because part of our kiakahi, of our purpose, is to make certain imprints. That's what legacy is. It's to contribute to certain imprints. And thus, you and I, we feel like we're really a part of something. I'm not at the effect or the effect of something. I am the something. And each and every one of us, when we come into that recognition, right, we come into full accountability and responsibility of our placement here and now. And it's so beautiful when we come into that, because for me, when I'm in that recognition, how in the world can I do harm? Why would I do harm? I have removed myself of all confusion. And for me, with this the disruptions that come up in our lives, I really feel that that which is informing all malice is confusion. I truly believe that.
I would say confusion or trauma.
Yes.
I believe that what we do then is we get caught in these trauma patterns, ancestral trauma patterns, personal trauma patterns, and then we get caught in distrust, disconnection, and it just perpetuates our own trauma and then an acting out of that trauma on others. So I think a critical part of these corrections that you're describing, particularly the first two, is how do we heal?
Yeah.
How do we heal so that we're back in right relationship with ourselves and then able to be more open and in right relationship with others? And then what we archive or what we really are embodying and expressing is coming from right alignment and right balance and being in tune with our soul selves in this embodied state.
Oh, Heather, what a great synopsis. Thank you so much. Because even, after those two corrections, there's now being in the full integrity of what we're contributing. Now it's about the contribution coming from those two. And then I feel into how some of the world functions right now. We're bypassing those first two and we're trying to force contribution.
Beautifully said.
And it turns into impositions. Yeah. Now we're at battle with one another because it doesn't have any authority. That being in the body, being the embodiment, that's the ultimate authority when it comes to a world of form. It doesn't have authority. And so, of course, we're not going to believe one another when we're trying to impose these imprints, these narratives. I don't believe you. Where's the authority? It's not present. And then in the Code of Lemuria, it says, love the body.
And it also, I would think, Keone, leads back to that need for possession, which is what you said really led to the downfall and our disconnection from you in the beginning. So we have to, it's really profound that we have to go through these codes that are correcting us in the proper order.
Yes. Oh, in the proper order. Yes, certainly. And what I'll share about that very last is if I match that with the periodic table, there was an element that used to be A but was somehow changed, and that was argon. Now, what's so fascinating and important about argon is it's all about plasma.
Wow.
And so the corrections lead us to the intelligence of plasma, which
is the energy of the cosmos.
Dark matter, everything. It's under the scaffolding of this consciousness. Yes. And so it delivers us to the conversation of now we're at plasma. Now what are you going to do?
Part of what's so powerful in this sequence that you're describing, Keone, is we have to be in the body and love the body to move into right relationship and right integrity in our actions and in our service to open to that spiritual expansion and our connection with the consciousness of the cosmos.
Yes.
This is profound. And that leads us back into the frequency that can enable us to reconnect with Mu and energy of love in that higher vibration and frequency.
Yeah, and I really love how this is also an invitation for all of us to take responsibility for that because, especially the way that academia has presented itself in modern times, it's all about taking and ingesting. And then we're now saturated with all these ideas. And as far as what is authentically ours, I don't know. And it's a reversal of that. Now it's about sharing a doctrine. Your doctrine and my doctrine, all of our doctrines, world of contrast. How can we share all of that? Toph, what you will, the godfather or grandfather of academia. I always feel like, our grandfather would be very, it's peculiar how we're engaging with his wisdom now. because true academia was more for contributing, not for assimilating. And that's what academia has turned into today, how to assimilate, not about contribution. I always say, you know, the burning of the Library of Alexandria was not to deprive us of knowledge. It was to deprive us of our awareness that we can contribute to knowledge.
I would also say, Keone, and you were talking earlier about the sort of shadow manifestations of the age of Aquarius, age of Pisces. The sub-age, the second half of the age of Pisces, is dominated by Virgo. So if you haven't connected to that energy of love and that mystical consciousness that Pisces meant to orient us to, and then if we were oriented to that, the Virgo expression is, how do I embody that and express that in my service in the world? But if we're playing out the shadow aspects of that, then that Virgo energy becomes my left idealization of the left brain analytical mind. And how do I absorb and assimilate knowledge? But knowledge is not wisdom.
Right.
And Toth So was the guide to that integration of left brain, right brain ways of knowing, so that whatever knowledge we're gathering becomes wisdom that we then share.
Yes, yes. And that behaves as a torsion.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of what I have been, I would say, like, challenged with like just my culture, with Hawaiian Mute culture, is that it can be exclusive. It can be only for certain bloodlines, only for certain people. And I've gone rogue where I'm like, how can aloha be a possession? How? I'm here to share. And so behaving as that torsion of the distribution of that knowledge just feels so natural to me. When I try to do it the other way, when I try to pull it into exclusivity, it feels unnatural to me.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And let's circle back now to the whales and dolphins, because they are such critical messengers for us of mu, frequency, and consciousness, but I think also guiding us in the shift at this time. And in August, I'm going to be interviewing the two women that did the film about Joan Ocean's work and her ongoing communication with the whales and dolphins and their wisdom. But you hold this ancient lineage of connection with them from your Mu lineage. So tell us about your understanding of the dolphins and whales.
Well, how exciting this conversation honoring the work of Joan Ocean. Yeah, you know, I have a specific relationship with whales and dolphins. I feel everyone in Hawaii does, just because they're companions for us here. And you know, what I love about whales and dolphins is that they are not afraid to make their presence known. They're not afraid to be located. And what I remember about whales and dolphins, specifically to Mu, is that they're one of the species that has chosen to engage with us in this dimension, in this reality. But they can at will shapeshift into that vibration of love. But they choose to be here with us. They choose to assist us. And one really cool thing about whales that maybe not a lot of people know is that they sing the same song their whole life. So they're creating a kind of pattern, a frequency pattern, where they're repeating themselves because they have an important message. And that important message that they repeat over and over again is how we can restore ourselves back into the energetic of love and Lemuria. One thing that I really love about dolphins is, in my culture, and personally, I know this to be true, but dolphins are the keepers of telepathy. They carry the codes of telepathy. And, you know, the behaviors of dolphins, they're so joyous. They're just so joyous. And when I match that with their skill of telepathy, I'm like, Have you looked around the world, dolphins? Why are you laughing? But the skill of telepathy is that we not only get to scan or read the field of someone at the surface level, which may be a reason why some people engage with telepathy, especially if it's, to somehow do it in kind of a malicious way to manipulate. But telepathy is also how to detect someone's true nature, something or someone's true nature. And the dolphins, in their skill of telepathy, when they look and they engage at this world, they see the true nature of everything and everyone as inherently good. Inherently good. And just like you're sharing, perhaps the disruptions of trauma and perhaps the disruptions of confusion have led us to behave and to function in the ways we do now. But even as the dolphins look at us in the dysfunction, they see that we are inherently good.
They see our true selves.
Yes. Yes. And so we have the dolphins here who are wanting to remind us that we are inherently good. And they embody that goodness to inspire us. They are the authority of that goodness. And then we have the whales who are present here to repeat the frequencies of mu over and over and over again, because they know that we really find safety in patterns. And so they're repeating themselves. And if I may, Heather, I'd love to translate the names of whales and dolphins and how that is a symbol within itself.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. So in Hawaiian language, whales is kohola, Kohola, and above the A is an accent bar that we call a kahako. It's kohola. So if we look into that word kohola and we do the kauna, as we say in my language, so the Hawaiian language and the Mu language is so sophisticated in that coded in the words are instructions on how to embody the word. So, and this is also why Mu in Hawaiian was never meant to be written, because it leaves too much room for mistranslation. It's a kind of language that must be offered in the moment. In the moment. It cannot be delayed. In the moment. So if we do the kauna and we look into, okay, if there are instructions of whale, what is the instruction on how to embody the whale or the whale energy? And koho la literally means to select the light. To select the light. And perhaps, Heather, in your own musings of what that could represent, how does that impact you to select the light?
Keone, I am just feeling energetically so moved by what you're describing. And I am profoundly moved by the energies of whales and dolphins. But as you describe this and speak this, and I just want to say too, I love how you talk about the language. It's carrying an embodiment and an energetic that can't be translated into the flatness of words. But what you're describing makes me feel the way the whales are guiding us to hear and remember the song of the harmony of the cosmos and to choose that light code, choose that frequency to bring ourselves back into balance and harmony.
Yes, Heather. I'm reminded of the primary law of noun energy. So for me, noun energy is feminine energy. And oftentimes you'll hear me say noun and verb only because in today's world, in the context of saying feminine and masculine, sometimes there's this need to correlate it to genders or sex. And so noun energy, feminine energy, the primary law of noun energy is consent. Many of us, we may not be in recognition of Mu Lemurian energetics because we're not even consenting. And so when the whales say to select the light, to select, and then we go through all the corrections within the heart, right? First, I need to love the body. I need to love the body. I need to love the contrast. And there's all these prerequisites so that we can properly make those proper selections. Because now we're talking about just the absolute sophistication of free will. And our greatest gift, which is also our most horrific nightmare, which is free will. But the whales are saying, you may select the light, but you must select it. I can only repeat this song for so long, but you must select it.
Mm, 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 mm. Profound. And what about the dolphins?
Yes. So the dolphin, the porpoise, the name in Hawaiian is Naya, Naia. And Naya, if we do the kauna, okay, and we look into what is the word actually telling us on how to embody dolphin energy, Naya, so la and ah, right? The two symbols that complete Kohola and Naya, they both refer to light. Light. Naya means to comprehend light. So we get to comprehend it as well. The comprehension of light. And perhaps same question, Heather. Thank you so much. The same question. How does that impact you to comprehend light?
Again, it's so moving because the feeling that I get is that this experience with a dolphin, the dolphin is able to see the light in me, to see that I am this being of light and love. And that the dolphin can call us back into that connection, that memory, that awareness.
Mm. Wow. That's so beautiful, Heather. You know, it's coming back into the conversation that I was just having about the perspective of how the world can be friendly and how with the telepathy of the dolphins, they can detect that in all things. They can detect the light. They can detect the inherent good. They can comprehend it. And it's an invitation. Can we do that? Can I detect the good in all things? Can I encourage that? Can I be an ambassador for that? Can I now determine that that's what I would love to extract from the world rather than perhaps the opposite, which perhaps is what we've been extracting for a long time because of all the disruptions and distortions that make it so loud for us. But the dolphins are penetrating that and saying, focus on the good and then extract that.
Mm. So from what you're saying, Keone, in such a profound way, they've chosen to be here in this frequency and in this time on the planet to be these guides to us, to remind us of the light, to remind us of this path back to Mu, to love, to be singing it, calling it forth in us, to help us remember, to help us find our way back.
Yes, yes. You know, they're also so skilled with sonar, right? And sonar is really how we measure time and space. That's what sonar is. And so the whales and the dolphins, they're behaving as that. You know, they're measuring the time and the space to which we're currently in. And then that's what they're feeding. That's what they're sharing with. And so even the sophistication of their sonar, it's so beautiful and it's so generous. It's all encompassing. They're really inviting all things to come into comprehension and to select the light.
So they are so supporting us in this transition time that we're in on the planet. But I love that part of their message is we have to choose. We have to take the path of light and love.
Yes, yes. And, you know, that's one of the fun things about how repetitive the whales are with their song over and over and over again is, you know, they're sharing something in consistency until we select and we consent to do that ourselves. And it's a call for all human beings right now to really come into their own leadership and their authority, which is so beautifully Aquarian too. and coming into our Aquarian self, where we can all acknowledge ourselves as leaders, but then not just as a sole leader, but to acknowledge all others as leaders as well. And that we're now exchanging in this field of leadership, which really requires the collapse and the dismantling of competition culture, which is one of the pillars of patriarchy. Oftentimes throughout my day, competition will come up and I'll be like, for what? Why? Why? A lot of the things that I feel that many people aren't doing is when these disruptors show up, why are we not questioning it? Why are we just allowing it to inform us? It becomes the pattern. And so when these disruptors come up, pivot. Why? Why? Where's the evidence of why I need to behave as this? I need to be instructed as such, right? And then perhaps that's where the paradigm begins to shift, because you're now intellectualizing it in a way as well, which can be very Aquarian, coming back into the authority of how and why we function, and coming into the sovereign leadership of how and why we function. It's really life-changing, but it also brings us into the recognition that the subordination and submissive culture has been so, I would say, intense, that it's how I have functioned. And I felt that was like the natural code of how I function, until I began to question the things that were informing me through the day.
Oh, this is so profound, Keone. And before we stop, just tied in with what you're saying with that, I would love to circle back to something you said before we got on the recording about how, as you're talking about the dismantling of the patriarchal paradigm and dismantling the competition and the disconnection. You also mentioned before we got on that this shift that we're in is meant to be a collective shift, not just an individual journey and transformation. And that, as I think, as with everything you're talking about today, as we do these corrections with Lemuria guiding us back into the energy of Mu, then we emanate that energy of plasma, of cosmic consciousness, of love that is supporting others. It's like we become like the whales then. We're in service to the light, to be singing that song to help others remember and come back into that connection, so we can be in this shift together.
Yes, I truly believe that our individual awakenings or healings, what you will, just complement the larger web and encourages that larger web to function appropriately. And even with, how the dolphins, what they teach us about, of course, we can locate the good within ourselves, and that's the place to begin, yes, but don't stop there. Detect and locate the good in all others, in all things. Can that good be transferable? And thus we begin to connect once again. Now the web is apparent, the web becomes obvious to us. And then this perception of division is no longer as overpowering as our ability and willingness to connect once again.
So we start with coming back to the sacredness of our own embodiment, and it will eventually lead us into the awareness that everything around us is sacred.
Yes.
Everything around us is filled with light.
Right. But that awareness can only happen when this is deemed sacred first. Otherwise, perhaps you don't feel like you belong in that web of sacredness until you say, I am sacred. This is my home. I belong in the web of sacredness because I am sacred.
Thank you, dear brother, for guiding us again with your incredible lineage and wisdom. And this feels so important in this time, that we remember that deeper meaning of Mu and the path of the correction code Lemuria guiding us back into that frequency of love and higher consciousness.
Yes, and I just want to say to all the audience and everyone who has been honoring this word Lemuria, thank you. Thank you. because it truly holds the code of the correction to restore us into this energetic of you. And so perhaps now it's a time for us to consider what that word, what the code of correction is within that word, and we proceed as such.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Keone. Thank you so much for continuing in this conversation. And thank you to the community. Blessings and love to you for how you are also on this path of correction to come back into the higher frequency of love. Blessings.